everyone, I'm Allison Mars. You're watching NBC News Now, and it's Friday. A big announcement from the Biden administration today in the fight against COVID. $1.7 billion going to help track and monitor emerging variants.
Right now, these variants account for nearly half of all COVID-19 cases in the United States. And we need more capacity in our public health system to identify and track these mutations. This funding will enable CDC and states to do more genomic sequencing as we activate the nation's great research capabilities to detect variants earlier.
From tracking variants to vaccinating Americans, strike teams are out in North Carolina making sure everyone there has access to a COVID vaccine. And in Michigan, the Johnson & Johnson pause hitting rural communities pretty hard, the very people who expect it to benefit the most. President Biden meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister at the White House today, the first face-to-face bilat of his administration. NBCNews.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece has all the details.
President Joe Biden held his first in-person meeting with a foreign leader at the White House today, hosting the Prime Minister of Japan. One central issue of the meeting was, of course, China. The two leaders talked about ways to counter Chinese aggression in the Taiwan Straits, against Hong Kong, and of course a number of human rights violations. It's all part of a broader effort by the administration to rally its allies into one single posture against China. Another topic that came up was gun control following the mass shooting in Indianapolis. A reporter asked President Biden following the meeting whether he needed to reconsider his posture on gun control legislation following another one of these shootings. The president defended his record on gun control and called on Congress to take action. Here's what he had to say.
This has to end. It's a national embarrassment. It is a national embarrassment what's going on. And it's not only these mass shootings that are occurring. Every single day, there's a mass shooting in the United States if you count all those who were killed out in the streets of our cities and our rural areas. It's a national embarrassment and must come to an end.
And it is worth noting that this is the second time a meeting with a foreign leader has been overshadowed by a mass shooting in the U.S. Now, one other topic that will likely be big news in Japan, the Japanese Prime Minister said he is continuing plans to go forward with the Olympics there, despite the pandemic and concerns by some public health officials about the safety of the event. And he said that President Biden threw his support as well behind sending U.S. athletes and supporting Japan's decision to go forward with the Olympics.
Vaccine strike teams on a mission to make sure that everyone can get a vaccine, especially historically marginalized communities. The Johnson & Johnson pause not helping. NBC News Now correspondent Maura Barrett is joining me from Raleigh, North Carolina. Maura, you've spent some time with a group called Resolve to Save Lives. They focus on vaccine equity. They also try to tackle vaccine hesitancy. How's that J&J pause affecting them?
It definitely has a huge impact, Allison, because this is a group that's working in North Carolina, also in historically marginalized communities in Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and Texas. And what they're doing specifically here is the big thing to tackle vaccine hesitancy is to make sure that you meet people where they're at. Like this church that we're at, the Premier Iglesias Church, they're targeting the Latino community here today with this vaccine site. And they're making sure ahead of time that they're communicating with the people in these neighborhoods to make sure they're educated and they know what's going on. In terms of the J&J vaccine, though, after doing all this work on education, after people already scheduled their appointments, they were seeing people cancel their Pfizer and Moderna appointments here today. They're getting their second dose of Moderna. So obviously these folks did show up to get vaccinated. But I wanted to hear from the community outreach manager who talks about how J&J plays into their long-term plan.
With the J&J pause, we've already seen some communities saying, no, we're not going to get it now. There were some folks in some of our community sites that canceled their appointments. They weren't even Pfizer. I mean, they were Pfizer or Moderna. But because of this, we did see that had an impact.
So she just said that this creates more work for them down the road. They also were planning to do J&J vaccination events for migrant farm workers as well as those who are homebound. And so this is something that definitely is an added step even as they've been working so hard throughout the pandemic to make sure that everything is done equitably. Allison.
So, Maura, I understand in North Carolina, anyone 16 and up can get a vaccine. That's great, right? It's access for a whole lot of adults. But how is Resolve to Save Lives working with that to make sure that all folks in North Carolina have access, especially communities that have challenges or even concerns about getting the shot?
Well, the big thing here is what they're looking at in North Carolina, because everyone is already eligible. They're wanting to serve as a model for the rest of the country when they open up eligibility on Monday to all adults. And so the big target that they've had here is making sure that they are getting vaccines in those marginalized communities, making sure they're educating, and the fact that they have these community embedded team members who have the ability to have a conversation one-on-one with somebody who might be hesitant, who is nervous about the J&J or any vaccine now because of what's been going on, and have those conversations. Bigger medical systems, I'm told, don't have the ability to do that because there's just so much going on. And they tend to be located in areas that are more affluent or are more focused on white populations. And so being able to be embedded in these communities, they're hoping that other states, other counties, as everything becomes more eligible, that they take on a similar approach to make sure that everyone has equitable access.
Really important issue. Maura, thanks for going to North Carolina to highlight it for us. We appreciate it. Michigan had big plans to use the single-dose J&J shot in hard-to-reach rural communities. That was before the vaccine was paused. So now what? NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber went to Alpena, Michigan to find out.
In rural Michigan, vaccine clinics like this one are still taking place in town, but this is not an option for everyone. If you look at this map with me for a minute, you can see these dots. These dots all represent some sort of office within Mid-Michigan Health's system. You can see we're up here in Alpena. It's pretty rural. There are a lot of areas where they are presumably really far from places like this where they could come in to get a vaccine. With the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that opened up a lot of doors to people who live in these rural, more isolated areas. And what Mid-Michigan Health decided to do was that because the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a little easier to store, to transport than the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, and also a single dose, they decided to do a homebound program where they would pack up that vaccine and literally take it to the most vulnerable residents living in isolated rural communities and give them their shot at home. So they would grab a cooler, fill it up with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and then take one of these duffel bags. And if you look inside here, you can kind of see some of the elements. This is basically a vaccine clinic in a duffel bag to go. So they would go out to the vulnerable residents who needed to get vaccinated, wanted to get vaccinated, but for whatever reason, be it their health, their age, or simply not having the money or the time or the resources to make it into a further location, a doctor's office or a clinic some 30, 40 minutes away, they could just take it directly to them. It opened a lot of doors for a lot of people, but now because of the Johnson & Johnson pause, they're not doing those appointments anymore. And doctors who are overseeing and were integral in developing this program say that they simply cannot do something like this with the 2-dose vaccines. Listen here.
We had a plan for vaccinating homebound next week in this area of about 25, 30 people. So we've had to pause that because practically, logistically, to try to do this twice is almost insurmountable. Not insurmountable, but it's very difficult. So the 1 dose really was the linchpin for that.
We met 2 brothers who live in rural northern Michigan, and they got vaccinated through this program about 3 weeks ago. One of the brothers told us that he has spot memory loss. So if he were to make one vaccine appointment and then a second, he might not remember to actually go to it. He also said he would have a really hard time getting there because he doesn't have a car. And even if he did, he probably couldn't afford the gas that would be necessary to make a commute to somewhere else to get vaccinated. So for him and his brother, this program was a really big deal, and they were happy to get vaccinated. The Johnson & Johnson pause has not derailed vaccination efforts in this area or in this state. Doctors here say they understand why the FDA decided to do this pause, but they really did feel like it gave them a lot of extra tools to reach more people, and having it stopped is a bit of a hindrance. They had some 30 people scheduled to have a vaccination appointment on Monday. That's not happening now. And in the middle of a pandemic, when we were trying to get as many people vaccinated as possible, to maybe not be able to vaccinate 100 people here or there who really want to get vaccinated, could be a really big deal and is not irrelevant. Allison?
Variants are almost half the new COVID cases here in the U.S., according to the White House COVID response team, which is why the Biden administration is spending nearly $2 billion to track them.
Another reason for these increases is the continued spread of highly transmissible variants, more than 50 to 70% more transmissible, which makes the race to stop the transmission even more challenging and threatens to overwhelm our healthcare system again in parts of this country. The emergence of variants underscores the critical need for rapid and ongoing genomic surveillance.
Joining me now, Dr. Anand Parekh, Chief Medical Advisor of the Bipartisan Policy Center. Dr. Parekh, what do you think of this genomic sequencing initiative? Will it help contain these new variants?
Hi, Alison. I think it's an important step forward. This is what viruses do. They mutate, and that's why genetic surveillance is so important. They help us to identify variants, for example, that are more transmissible or more lethal, or variants that may evade our immune system so we know whether treatments work, vaccines work, whether we're more likely to be reinfected. So it absolutely impacts our pandemic response moving forward. We were behind the wheel. We've been catching up over the last few months. So I think this step today will further accelerate our efforts.
Michigan is expanding its mask mandate to include kids as young as 2 to 4. We know young people there have been a big part of the COVID surge in the state. Will that help? And what else do you think Michigan should be doing to get the situation there under control?
It does align with the CDC recommendations. What we've seen in Michigan are not just K to 12 school outbreaks. We have also seen outbreaks in childcare facilities, daycare facilities, day camps as well. Of course, there is a compliance issue with kids that young. We have to do the best we can, but it is aligned with the CDC recommendation. I think that measure today is just one of several measures that the governor has invoked to extend for another month the mask mandate in public, as well as restrictions with respect to indoor gatherings and indoor capacity. All of that, Allison, is just so important. Michigan is right now the center of the storm right now with B117, and it's so important over the next couple of weeks to do everything possible to reduce cases, hospitalizations, and deaths.
Dr. Parekh, at today's White House COVID briefing, Surgeon General Vivek Murthy talked about the J&J pause. Here he is.
This week is a reminder that safety is our top priority. Even when an extremely rare safety event occurs, our scientific agencies will act with thoroughness and transparency so people can remain confident in the vaccines that are recommended to them.
Dr. Parekh, do you agree with the Surgeon General? Is this the system working as intended? And what else would you like to see here?
It does really show that the system is working, and it also should build vaccine confidence, the fact that regulators are taking this so seriously. That being said, I really hope, Allison, that in the coming days, hopefully not longer than a week or so, we can get some interim resolution here, even if that means some age and gender restrictions. You'll recall there were two reasons for the pause. One, to alert the healthcare community about treatment with respect to the complications of the blood clot. And the second, to assess the scope. Are there more than just the 6 cases identified? So I really hope that we can get to the bottom of that quickly, because as you've just been talking about today, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is such an important tool in our armamentarium. Certainly, in some cases, we can get Pfizer and Moderna vaccines to replace that. But for certain populations that are underserved, hard to reach, it's such an important vaccine. And so I really hope that there's quick and decisive action in the coming days, if not a week, hopefully not much longer than that.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get some news there next week. Dr. Parekh, always great to have you on the show. Have a nice weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Let's go to NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She's got the latest headlines from NBCnews.com and is going to help usher us into the weekend. Simone.
Let's do it. And let's start with some news out of Washington, Allison. Federal prosecutors securing their first guilty plea in connection with the January 6th Capitol riot. John Schaefer pleading guilty today to multiple felonies, including illegally entering the Capitol. Schaefer is a member of the far-right group, the Oath Keepers. His plea agreement includes cooperating with the government, which could be important in understanding the forces behind the siege. And switching gears to some international news here, Russia's foreign minister announcing today that Moscow will order 10 U.S. diplomats to leave Russia. The move following new sanctions by the Biden administration, who ordered 10 Russian diplomats expelled on Thursday and added new restrictions on Russia's ability to borrow money. Russia's saying there's a possibility it will take, quote, painful measures against American business in the country, but that it wouldn't take that action just yet. And Prince Philip will be driven to his funeral tomorrow in a custom Land Rover hearse that he actually helped design. Buckingham Palace saying Philip began consulting on the design with Land Rover's engineers some 18 years before he died. The late prince had a deep interest for British-made cars like the Land Rover, which got his personal seal of approval, or what they call the royal warrant, 40 years ago. And there may have been more of the iconic T-Rex roaming the planet than previously thought. Researchers at the University of California, Berkeley say there were about 2.5 billion of them during the span of their lifetime. And the scientists came to this conclusion after crunching some pretty intense numbers using calculations based on the dinosaur's body size, sexual maturity, and energy needs. But get this, only about 100 T-Rex fossils have been found so far. So there's still a lot more digging to do, Allison.
Simone, if there's something I like as much as space, it's fossils and dinosaurs for sure. So thank you for that update. The gunman who killed 8 people at an Indianapolis FedEx facility was a 19-year-old former FedEx employee. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton joins me now. Antonia, I know authorities giving that update today. What else have you learned from them this evening?
Allison, that was actually the fact that people were most sort of anticipating and surprised by from the presser that happened about an hour ago right behind us here. To find out that the gunman, Brandon Scott Hole, was an employee here at this FedEx, is helping give people some context and color to what happened last night. And many of the employees who people have spoken to throughout the day had suspected this all along. Many of them described to us that when they came to work, they were accustomed to good security, to themselves being patted down. And many of them assumed that someone who could do this and do it in such a short amount of time must have been someone familiar with the premises. We still do not have much information about his motive, why he chose last night, if he knew who was on the shift then. But take a listen to what we did learn at the press conference about an hour ago.
FedEx officials have confirmed that Mr. Hole was a former employee at the facility, and he was last employed in 2020. There were at least 100 people in the facility at the time of the incident. Many were changing shifts and were on their dinner break.
You can hear him describe there how many employees were there that night, changing shifts. And that has led to a lot of the chaos here. Just the large numbers of employees who were there, of course, means, multiples in terms of loved ones who have spent the day, Allison, wondering where they are and how they are. Many of them at a Holiday Inn around the corner from us right here, who have waited, tried to talk to fellow colleagues and employees who worked alongside their loved ones, waiting for information from authorities here. And what we're hearing from the coroner's office is that they are still actively identifying people. So there are people who have spent the entire day here in Indianapolis unaware of what's happened to their loved ones who work here, Allison.
Antonia, our colleague, Justice Correspondent Pete Williams, is also reporting that the suspect's mother reached out to the FBI at some point last year to say that her son might try to commit suicide by cop. What else do you know about that?
That's right. And that's another really fascinating, texture that we've now received. That happened in March of 2020, according to Pete Williams' reporting. The mother reached out and warned authorities of this. And then what we also learned from his reporting was that then Brandon was brought into basically committed for mental health evaluation, that a shotgun was confiscated from him at the time. And so we don't know sort of the status around the gun that he used last night. Authorities said that they did not know that it was necessarily illegally owned or found. But now that we have this information, it gives a lot more texture to what unfolded last night. And we hope that a lot of the chaos we've experienced over today and the recent hours starts to clarify soon, Allison.
All right, Antonia, I know it's been tough reporting today. Thank you so much for all of your hard work to get us some more information. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Republicans agree on just one thing about President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan. They don't like it. The president is willing to negotiate, it seems, but Republicans can't agree on a counteroffer. NBC News national political reporter Sahil Kapoor joins me now. Sahil, Senator Shelley Moore Capito, the top Republican on the Environment and Public Works Committee, working on a conceptual Republican bill. How is that going?
It's slow going so far, Allison. Republicans don't have a top line figure or even really a range of a price tag from which to begin negotiating. They can't agree amongst themselves on that, which makes it very difficult to write a bill. Here's what Republicans do know. They strongly oppose President Biden's plan. They don't like the price tag of $2.25 trillion. They say that's too much. They don't like the idea of increasing taxes to pay for it. Shelley Moore Capito described a corporate tax increase as a non-negotiable red line when she spoke to reporters just yesterday about this. So there are significant disagreements here. They also don't believe that the definition of infrastructure should be as expansive as President Biden's definition, which includes things like elder care and child care. They believe it should be restricted to things like roads and bridges. So not a whole lot of progress here, and Republicans coming up with a counteroffer to Biden, which would signify the beginning of earnest negotiations.
So, Sahil, if the GOP can't unite, does this set up the Democrats to pass another bill through reconciliation, or is there still hope that both parties can work together here and that maybe they won't have to turn to reconciliation so soon?
There is still that hope, Allison. I would not expect a turn to reconciliation anytime in the foreseeable, in the coming days, or maybe even the coming weeks. This is going to be a production, and part of that production is for Democrats to prove that they tried really hard, in fact, to get Republican support. And if they just couldn't do it, then the White House is going to endorse a different kind of route, the same route that they took for COVID-19 aid. But this is a different situation because COVID-19 was an emergency when President Biden walked into the Oval Office. There were people dying every day. Infrastructure is a different kind of thing. The White House will argue that these investments are important, that they're necessary, but it's not the same kind of emergency. So they're going to have to play this differently if they want to hew to President Biden's promise of pursuing this new kind of bipartisanship and unity, even if some aides, Allison, strongly believe that the likely end game is reconciliation, that if Republicans can't even come up with a counteroffer, how are Democrats to negotiate, even if they want to, Allison?
All right, Sahil, let's see. We got to get the Republicans to get on the same page and come up with a counteroffer. We got to see then if they can play nicely with the Democrats and they can come up with some sort of compromise. A whole lot of compromise on the table here. So we'll keep an eye on that for sure next week. Sahil, thank you. HHS caring for nearly 20,000 unaccompanied migrant children right now, according to federal data. In more than 80% of those cases, the child has a family member in the U.S. So why is it so difficult to connect them? NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns shows us what so many families are going through to find their kids.
You could say it's a story about immigration, about the overwhelming number of unaccompanied minors in government custody, about policy and politics. But it's also a story about a teddy bear named Peludin. He traveled from Santa Ana, California to Phoenix, Arizona in the arms of a mother, desperate to reunite him with her 6-year-old boy named Juan Felipe, holding the toy all through the journey as tightly as she wanted to hold her son.
Peludin, your son? Sí, le compré este porque como se perdió el de él para que since he lost his, this one's here so that he knows that he has a buddy because he lost one on the way.
Juan Felipe lost his first Peludin in the desert when crossing the border from Mexico to Arizona. His mom, Andrea, says she came to the U.S. from Venezuela last year because of threats on her life. When her family started receiving the same threats, they too came here seeking asylum. Juan Felipe traveled with his stepfather, half-brother, and his abuela. but they were separated by Customs and Border Protection despite the fact that he was with his stepfather, and Juan Felipe was deemed an unaccompanied minor. CBP did not respond to requests for comment on the separation. Andrea spent a week trying to get information about her son.
Nadie me decía, no decían ni si estaban o no estaban. No me decían nada, no le puedo dar información, no le puedo dar información. Llamaba 3 veces al día, en la mañana, en la tarde y en la noche.
And she's not the only one making calls. According to DHS, 80% of unaccompanied minors have a family member living in the U.S., and 40% of those family members are parents. They call into this government hotline to try to get more information about their kids. We joined a father looking for his 2 daughters, ages 9 and 13, as he tried calling the hotline, which he's done every day for 3 weeks. After more than 1.5 hours of this, an operator finally answered, but didn't tell him where his girls are.
Yo ya te había dicho que las niñas estaban en el albergue y te había mandado ya los documentos desde el día 31.
Ajá, correcto, pero desde ese día yo no sé nada de mis hijas.
Bueno, tanto como no saber nada, no, porque sí sabías que las niñas estaban en el albergue y que estaban seguras.
No, yo no sé dónde están, como le digo, yo desde ese día yo no he tenido comunicación con las niñas ni nada, no sé dónde están realmente.
No, es información confidencial. Esta situación es de espera, de paciencia y de serenidad.
This father now must wait. But Andrea eventually did get a call from CBP telling her Juan Felipe wouldn't stop crying. Then another call from Health and Human Services telling her he wasn't eating or sleeping.
What was it like to get those phone calls, hear your son crying on the other end of the line? What was that experience like for you?
Ay, eso me destrozó el alma, me destrozó porque era muy lindo porque él cuando lo iban a trasladar no se dejaba montar a la van, al bus y decía, sin mi abuelita no, sin mi abuelita no.
She learned he was placed in a temporary foster home in Phoenix and was terrified she'd never get him back.
No, eso es muy difícil.
It's very difficult.
Yo no sé qué hizo mi hijo, está pagando todo.
So she sought help from Dr. Amy Cohen, who runs Every Last One, a nonprofit that helps reunite families. The two quickly got on a plane to Arizona to advocate for Juan Felipe's release. Amy believes reunification should happen more quickly.
It's not difficult to know when a child and a parent are child and parent. And that was demonstrated even the first day that this child was taken into ORR custody, when the parent was called in the morning by Customs and Border Patrol, in the afternoon by the case manager, and at night by the foster mother, because none of them could handle his distress. And all of them knew that the person to turn to was his mother. So why are we creating this level of distress when we know so quickly who the parent is?
There are currently around 20,000 children in HHS custody. Data from the last week shows children released from HHS had spent an average of 31 days in custody.
We are inundated with calls from families with even very young children who they've not heard from for weeks and weeks, who they're unable to locate because even the systems for locating a children have broken down. And so we're hearing from parents who are as traumatized as the parents that I saw during Zero Tolerance from the separation from their children.
According to an HHS spokesman, at the start of this year, the agency was able to match one case manager to about 12 children. But the number of children per manager has shot up as the agency scrambles to hire more people. The spokesman did not provide the current ratio. But this week, Andrea became one of the lucky ones. And so did Peludin, finally finding his lost boy.
How are you feeling? ¿Cómo te sientes? Feliz, feliz. Me dijo que no se quería separar de mí nunca más.
And Dasha joins us live now from Tucson, Arizona. Dasha, just so many of those heartbreaking stories, those emotional reunions that we wish we were seeing more of. The number of unaccompanied minors in HHS custody expected to top 35,000 next month. What is HHS doing? How is the government trying to prepare for that when they are already so overwhelmed?
Hey, Allison, thanks for helping us share this story. And before I answer your question, I just have to say Customs and Border Protection just got back to us. We had asked them about why Juan Felipe was separated from his stepfather, even though he was his legal parent. And they told us that they cannot comment on specific cases due to privacy reasons. But when it comes to HHS, what they're going to really have to do is improve that ratio of children being released to parents or family members, improve that ratio to the number of children coming into those facilities, especially as these numbers are expected to grow so significantly. HHS tells me one of the biggest challenges has been the lack of case managers. Those are the people who manage that reunification process. They tell me they're looking to hire more and to staff up just as quickly as possible, Allison.
All right, Dasha, thank you so much for all of your reporting. We really appreciate it. I hope you have a good weekend. Closing arguments in the Derek Chauvin murder trial start Monday. Then it's up to the jury to deliberate. The judge telling the jurors to plan for long and hope for short, saying it is entirely up to them whether that's an hour or a week. NBC News correspondent Megan Fitzgerald is in Minnesota.
Allison, we are just days away from deliberations. On Monday, the jurors will get the case, and they will ultimately decide if Derek Chauvin is guilty of the charges brought against him. Now, today, right now, we know that the prosecution and the defense, they are going over the exact verbiage that will be read to the jury in what's known as jury instructions. This is a really critical part of this process because legal jargon can be hard to understand. So they are breaking it down so that jurors are absolutely clear on what they need to consider to find Derek Chauvin guilty or not guilty on each of the 3 charges that have been brought against him. There's also going to be instruction around Derek Chauvin invoking his Fifth Amendment right to not testify. We heard from the first time in court yesterday from Derek Chauvin. The jurors weren't there, but I want you to listen to what he had to say.
Have you made a decision today whether you intend to testify or whether you intend to invoke your Fifth Amendment privilege?
I will invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege today.
Now, George Floyd's family has been inside the courtroom, rotating amongst each other and watching very closely as this trial plays out. So we asked them how they felt about Derek Chauvin not taking the witness stand, and they said they were disappointed. That could be the only opportunity they would have had to actually hear from him, and in some ways even get some closure as to why he did the actions that he did on that day in May of last year. But again, we will all be watching next week as the jurors get this case and begin deliberations.
100 days ago, our nation's capital was under siege, lawmakers and staffers fearing for their lives. NBC News' Frank Thorpe has been connecting with those survivors in the 100 days since January 6th. Here are their stories and memories.
It's an image that nobody's ever seen, not even in the Civil War, the Confederate flag flying inside the Capitol. Seeing that man strut about like that, proudly thinking he had a right to be there, just pisses the hell out of me. There were way, way, way more people inside the building than I thought initially when I ran down the steps. Because at that moment, I thought it was 15, 20 guys. Had no idea what the West Front looked like, had no idea that it was overrun. Because it was in the middle of covering, what was going on inside the chamber, that I'm slowly realizing that, oh, it's not just 10 guys. It's, oh my God, they're all over the rotunda. Oh my God. Where are the cops? They're inside the chamber. That moment, slowly coming to realization, like, it's not a good place to be. Every time I walk up those steps that Goodman pulled the mob away from, I think about it. I feel like I'm bonded to those stairs because I'm always going to think about him running up and me trying barely to keep up ahead of him. That was kind of the first moment where everything kind of went wrong.
I think the moment whenever it was all over, the insurrection was all over, and I got to sit down and really reflect on what happened. I think that sticks with me the most. I felt sad, anger, just there were a lot of emotions going through my mind. I'm still trying to process it. So I still have moments where I get really upset. And I hope they'll remember how hard we fought and the bravery of the officers that were here.
The crowd is using munitions against us.
Probably what sticks with me the most, and there were many, but what sticks with me the most is inside the Lower West Terrace door. You know, the lock got breached, and I don't know, maybe it was 60 or 70 of us trying to just keep them from getting in through the door, and it literally and figuratively, it was forever. I mean, it was just pushing, pulling, fighting. I couldn't get that close because at that point I was tackled, and they stole my helmet, took my helmet. They tried to get my gas mask. It was all these surreal things, like, this cannot be happening. This cannot be happening. This cannot be happening. But it was. You know, I have moments. It comes back in like flashes, and it's hard to not have it with you every day. For those of us that work at the Capitol still, we're still working at our crime scene.
Beginning of the day was shock, just seeing just that mass and that wave of people on the West Front. I mean, no matter who you were that day, you know, we were terrified. You were like, you know, how are we going to beat 40,000 people with the manpower we have? And then as soon as they started breaching the building, and you hear over the radio, the 1033s was our distress code. You know, officer in trouble, officer down, officer needs assistance, officer hurt. You just get angry, and I think
49 hours declaring a riot.
If you were fighting that day, I don't think this will ever feel normal. Every time I was still walking in here, I think, okay, you know, that's where this happened, and I can't get, you know, it's hard to get that out of your mind because it was such a traumatic experience for a lot of people. A lot of people are saying that, you know, we failed because, you know, they got in the building, and I think my biggest thing is that people take away from it is the Capitol Police and the entities that came in. We didn't fail. We protected every member of Congress. Not one member of Congress was hurt with a scratch that day. We protected every staffer that was in here. Everybody was accounted for. Nobody was hurt. The only casualties we had were, you know, obviously officers. But at the end of the day, we did our job.
We were locked in here, and I heard people, you couldn't see it, but I heard people running back and forth. That was kind of like, okay, this is really going down. We have people that breached the building, and they're running the installation amok, doing anything that they want. So that was the only point that I was scared when I was in this locker room, hunkered down, and when I heard police officers running back and forth and grabbing people and IDing them. Some people didn't belong here. I was scared then. It could have been a lot worse, and I'm glad that it wasn't, and I'm kind of over it, but not over it, and I keep a vigilant eye out, too. I keep an eye out all the time.
The emotion that sticks with me the most is a combination of fear and anger. The anger arises from the audacity, the unmitigated gall these people had to lay siege to the seat of our democracy and put us in this precarious position. I saw them in Statuary Hall, like walking through this hallowed place of democracy, and just seeing these sycophants here, armed and dangerous. And I think that moment truly, for lack of a better term, brought it home. It just terrified me.
I thought this place was so much safer than it was. I don't know that I'll ever be able to walk through those halls and just be like, oh, you know, whatever. You're very conscious. I'm Latina, and I grew up seeing Venezuela's government just like fall apart. And then to see that here, horrible. I mean, just that's how fragile our democracy is. And so I hope that through these pieces that just kind of humanize what happened, it gives people perspective as to how important it is to be mindful of the leaders you elect.
Elite members of the U.S. military sharing misinformation, racist comments, even QAnon conspiracies in secret Facebook groups. NBC News correspondent Carol Lee has that exclusive report. It's all part of NBC's American Extremism Week.
They're the best of the best, the elite of the U.S. military. And yet, an exclusive look inside secret Facebook groups shows something troubling. An NBC News review of private Facebook groups for special forces, visible only to vetted members, shows some share disturbing content. Misinformation about a stolen 2020 election, racist and disparaging comments about America's political leadership, and even QAnon conspiracy theories.
Does that surprise you?
No, I'm afraid to say that doesn't surprise me at all. That is what my own Facebook feed looks like on a day-to-day basis, and it has for five or more years at this point.
Jack Murphy is a former Army Ranger and Green Beret who writes and has a podcast about the military. We described to him the troubling posts we found in 2 of 4 secret groups we reviewed.
Is it dangerous that we see members of the Special Forces community espousing these sorts of views?
I think it is dangerous. I think it becomes a question of dual loyalties. You know, if we look in regards to the QAnon conspiracy, if you really believe that our government consists of a cabal of pedophiles that are, you know, trying to deconstruct democracy, then it becomes a question of who are you loyal to? What are you fighting for? Or what are you fighting against?
Collectively, the 2 groups have more than 5,000 members, with some members belonging to both. U.S. Special Operations Command has about 70,000 current personnel, and there are thousands more retired special forces. Heidi Byrick has been tracking extremism in the military for 2 decades.
Can you give me a sense of how prevalent extremism is in the military?
Well, the big problem we have when it comes to extremism in the military is that there's literally no good data.
Why are these secret Facebook groups that we found with special forces talking about things like QAnon and racism, why is that so valuable to someone like you who studies this?
Well, it's an incredible find, first of all, because it's very difficult to get into secret Facebook groups. But also, these are the exact troops who we do not want involved with things like QAnon that the FBI has said is a violence-inducing conspiracy theory.
The January 6th siege on the Capitol saw more than 24 active duty military and veterans arrested. The Pentagon's handling of right-wing extremism now under renewed scrutiny. Just last week, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin announced new measures, screening military recruits for extremist behavior and training outgoing service members on ways extremist groups might target them.
How big of a threat is this?
That's difficult to ascertain. I don't want to over-exaggerate this point. I don't think that the average Special Forces member or veteran is a conspiracy theorist per se, but I also don't want to downplay this.
Humans have thoughts, and we don't like all the thoughts that people have.
Is there anything in what we've found that would violate Defense Department policy? And if so, what action would you take?
So the first thing would be a reason for further investigation, right? All the way down at the organizational level, at a commander's inquiry, which could lead to an investigation, whether administrative or criminal, depending on where it went. Were it found to be contrary to policy in the areas of interactions with extremist organizations, the DoD policy that's under review, were you a violator of a policy, you would be subject to administrative sanctions leading to possibly separation from government service.
Would you move in to try to shut down any of these groups?
For purposes of doing the suitability administrative decision, right, we are not permitted to do basically what you're able to do. I can't create a friend relationship to get into and it's Fourth Amendment, it's expectation of privacy, and there are protections. It's not against the law to say I hate XXX, right? And whatever that is, it's not against the law. It's inappropriate depending on what you're talking about for our behavioral standards and our suitability standards for government and for DoD, but not against the law.
You might catch some heat for doing this interview. Why are you speaking out?
I'm speaking out because I think it's important that our peers have this discussion. I think that our community has to have this discussion. I think we have to have that as veterans and active duty service members.
Murphy says the tight-knit Special Forces community is family, and that's why this hits so close to home.
Now to a story of an unidentified variety. The Pentagon has new information about a series of mysterious sightings over Navy warships. One of those sightings, caught on video, shows what looks like a flying pyramid-shaped object. If we're talking about potential UFOs, you know what that means. NBC News correspondent Gadi Schwartz is on it.
Hey, Allison. Yeah, a little bit hard to get your mind wrapped around this. We're talking about an upside-down triangle or some sort of triangular object floating above a Navy ship about 700 feet in the air, then disappearing into the night. Another flying object that seemed to drop into the water and didn't resurface. It's a head-scratcher for sure, and it's posing a huge national security question. Have we been leapfrogged by some other country when it comes to technology, or is there something else out there that we just can't understand?
In night vision video from a Navy destroyer, a mysterious flying triangle above the deck of the ship. The Pentagon confirming the images obtained by documentary filmmaker Jeremy Corbell were taken by Navy personnel, expected to be a part of a report on unidentified aerial phenomenon to be presented to Congress this summer. Already online, some skeptics say the images are caused by cameras trying to focus, but some of the objects go beyond just flying in the sky. One shows a spherical object dipping into the ocean, similar to an incident in Puerto Rico where an object was tracked buzzing an airport, then flying into the water, popping back out before appearing to split into two and disappearing. Over the last several weeks, some of the nation's top former intelligence officials have been raising eyebrows.
Look at this thing. It's rotating.
Former CIA Director R. James Woolsey said he knew of a case where a plane was paused in midair.
A friend of mine was able to have his aircraft stop at 40,000 feet or so and not continue operating as a normal aircraft. What was going on?
In December, ex-CIA Director John Brennan said it was arrogant to believe there are no other forms of life other than the ones on Earth. And former intelligence chief John Ratcliffe says officials have been tracking technology beyond our capabilities.
We're talking about objects picked up by satellite imagery that are difficult to explain.
Like another incident off the coast of California in 2004 when a fighter squadron encountered an object that seemed to defy gravity.
What do you think it is?
I honestly don't know. I don't think that we have developed that technology. I don't think we developed it on this planet.
Video from that encounter and two other incidents were officially released by the Pentagon last year. Now new signs that the Pentagon could declassify more sightings of what they can't explain.
And Allison, one other interesting tidbit. A couple of weeks ago, the Navy's top officer was asked about these sightings around the ships. He said it wasn't just us. He said other countries have been having sightings as well. We know historically many of our European allies, France, the UK, Belgium, Mexico, Chile, Peru, just to name a few, have all had their own incidents. There have even been some recent reports surfacing in places like Manitoba, Canada, that are just starting to come to light. So still a lot more to come.
Fans across the world honoring Selena today on what would have been her 50th birthday. The Queen of Tejano rose to fame in the 90s and is one of the top Latin artists of all time. NBC News Now anchor Morgan Radford remembers the pop icon.
That's right, Allison. Today would have been her 50th birthday. Selena Quintanilla, she was the original, the ultimate crossover artist, and now she's inspiring an entirely new generation.
You've heard her music, seen her story, and felt the love from her fans. I love you. Selena Quintanilla, the Queen of Tejano, La Leyenda, the ultimate and original Spanish language crossover artist.
Selena means everything to us.
Now, on what would have been her 50th birthday, her reach is farther than ever. With more than 213 million streams on Spotify this year alone, and college courses taught on her legacy, and entire fan groups who celebrate her life.
Why do you guys look up to Selena?
I think of her as a role model. She was the queen of Tejano music.
An inspiration for all of us, especially for the Latino community. Since we were little, we always listened to her music.
A Texas girl born to humble beginnings, Selena rose to stardom, learning Spanish and sharing her Mexican-American heritage with millions of fans, landing the #1 certified Latin album in all of U.S. music history. A meteoric rise, tragically cut short when she was fatally shot by the former president of her fan club in 1995, just days before her 24th birthday. But now she's reaching a new generation through the hit Netflix series Selena. Director Jaime de Avila says her story resonates now more than ever.
We're talking about someone who Beyonce counts as inspiration, Casey Musgraves, Cardi B, everyone who's an icon in American pop culture today often claims Selena as an icon.
Inspiring a legacy for generations to come.
She said impossible is possible, and I'm like, okay, it's not impossible, I can do it.
And Selena taught you that?
Yeah.
And today's celebrations continue. In fact, a Texas state legislator introduced a bill to make today, April 16th, Selena Day. And for those fans, the Netflix series Selena is going to premiere its second season on May 4th.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.